Employers of Reddit, what has been your most awkward interview for a new employee ever? I was phone screening an art candidate for a video game project. The recruiter had sent me a fine looking resume, which included 10 years of modeling, texturing, rigging, and animating experience. On his website he had some pretty good dragon type creatures, so I called him up. I started the interview by asking the candidate about the last project he worked on. He said he made wyverns for the game Second Life. I asked him to tell me about that project. He proceeded to excitedly launch into a description of the different types of wyverns and their relationships to each other in wyvern society. Apparently one wyvern named Bob was a jerk until you get to know him, but his wyvern lover was very friendly and outgoing. I explained that I wanted to know about his last job. Could he talk about his artistic process or what he learned, or what he would want to do differently on a future project? But the candidate couldn't seem to switch away from explaining his wyvern characters. He kept going on about all their backstories. I eventually got him to explain that all his projects over the past 10 years related exclusively to these wyvern Second Life characters. When I verified that he had never worked as an employee for a paying company, he explained that he hated corporations and would never agree to work for one. I told him that this interview was for a job as an artist at a corporation. He proceeded to politely tell me he was no longer interested. Not currently an employer, but I managed an arcade for a year. Did a Skype interview for one of our locations that wasn't nearby to me, so it was easier to use Skype than drive out for interviews with high school kids. I swear this guy was playing games on his computer, clicking almost non-stop, looking around his screen, etc. Only asked about half my questions, didn't call him back. I was a GM for a Chick-fil-A for a while. 19-year-old kid walks into the restaurant for an interview. He seems nice enough and the interview was good, so I offered him a job on the spot. He broke down in tears. At first, I thought he was overly ecstatic and was merely happy crying. Odd, but some people are desperate. He kept crying and didn't seem pleased, so I thought maybe the stress level of the interview was high and he was relief/stress crying. Nope. This kid was extremely upset. Apparently, his parents gave him an ultimatum to get a job or leave the house. But working fast food wasn't what he wanted to do for his whole life. He had an interview later that day at some game/video store in town. That was his dream job. This seems like it would be no big deal, but after talking to him, consoling him for 5 minutes, I realized he believed that once I offered him the job he was forced to accept and begin working immediately. It seemed like he felt he was supposed to be fine working at a Chick-fil-A for the next 40 years until he retired, and that he had no choice in the matter. I asked if his parents told him he had to accept the first offer, or if they were forcing him to keep a job for a few years for a steady job history. Nope. He just really had no idea that people changed jobs. Both parents only ever talked about working at one place, so he assumed where you got your first job was also where you retired from. Not me, but one of my old bosses. I ended up taking over interviews for this department for a while before I quit. Had a middle-aged gentleman not only show up late because he was riding the bus, okay it happens, but also brought his not super well behaved young kid. My old boss, being super nice, tries to proceed with the interview with a toddler running around the office until the interviewee says, "Hang on, my kid is hungry," produces a bag of goldfish crackers from his pocket, and then sprinkles them all over the floor for the kid to gobble up like a literal animal. Old boss said it took everything in him not to crack up, thanked Goldfish Man for his time, and sent him on his way. He didn't get the job. Edit. I understand people go through rough times, but don't sprinkle crackers on the gross old carpet of a place you've never been in before for your toddler to eat during an interview. An ex-boxer and drug trafficker I knew came for a job at a factory where I was a supervisor. He openly told me in the interview that he just wanted a job for the appearance and asked if I could tuck him away somewhere easy so he could keep his own hours. Lol. Girl came in with facial tattoos, one of a spider web on her chin, and a couple of others I couldn't really identify. This was just for a server position. I hired her. She had a good resume and was personable enough. On her third day she just didn't show up. She came in about 2 hours later drunk off her ass and asked why we called in someone else. She called me an asshole, and I told her she's no longer employed. She literally came in 2 weeks later with her resume, like she didn't know she'd been fired. No one told me it was the same girl, and I sat down with her. I was surprised as hell, and told her she'd been fired before and it wasn't an option to rehire her. She literally did not remember working there for a few days, or meeting me or anyone else at the restaurant. It was awkward as frick, because she cried for about 5 minutes. About a month later, a co-worker said she saw her kinda hard to hide the tattoo with a sign outside of a freeway asking for money. I still feel bad, but mon not showing up and being drunk on your third day. I once interviewed someone who had listed several technologies on her resume that she didn't actually have any experience with. The interview started like this. I look at her resume. So, looks like you have some experience with SVN. No, I don't know what that is. Me, subversion? She gives me a blank stare. Me, the version control system? I've never heard of it. Me, you have it listed on your resume. Long silence while she just stares at me. It didn't get any better from there. An applicant for our psychologist position had a decent resume, but required a phone interview as she lived interstate. The phone interview was rife with audio problems. Her answers were interrupted by loud rushing noises that sounded like water, and she seemed distracted. Halfway through the interview, she asked if we could call back later. Turned out she was walking along the beach shore, collecting seashells. As the sun was setting in the horizon, the ocean allegedly looked so beautiful that she felt compelled to stop and take photos. Interviewed a guy in his mid-50s for a job and he proceeded to tell me how he got fired for punching his last boss in the mouth. Within the first 30 seconds of the interview, I was a supervisor at a casino and did all the hiring for the Cajun Bank. Candidate looked good on paper. I explained our drug policy and how certain things in one's background were an automatic no. I explained that the gaming commission would be doing a background check and her employment was provisional to their okay. Got to the end of the interview, she leaned in. So, you'll don't check for coke, do you? I'm not an employer, but I've talked with my previous manager on some of his interview experiences. He's had numerous candidates who, when asked why they're interested in the job, say they don't want to be cooped up inside all day at a desk. The job is in financial services, at a desk, indoors, all day. He's also talked about people who talk about how they didn't list their previous employers as references because they'd have absolutely nothing good to say about them. We used to ask a math question as part of the beginning of our interviews. It was always something relatively simple like, what is 60% of 300? We asked this exact question to a candidate, and she paused. No, a pause lasts for a few seconds. She stopped. A minute went by, and then another passed. After a while, I told her that it didn't matter, and that she could just guess. She declined. No, declining would imply that she said anything at all. Instead, she stared down at her fingers for another 4 minutes. At this point, my peer and myself are on the verge of laughing. I'm not exaggerating, it was actually around 7 minutes that felt like an eternity. When I was digging my nails into my thigh so that I would not smile, she looked up. She stared me straight in the eyes and said, $57. Never once was this a question about money. Edit. To answer a few questions. No, she did not get the job. When we asked the question, it was never a deal breaker if they got it wrong, and we always offered the candidate paper and a pencil. If someone came back with an answer that was approximate, or I could understand their train of thought, it was the same to me as getting the question correct. $57, though. I wasn't the employer in this convo, but I was the lead SAD supervisor, so I participated in the interview. The company was an ISP computer sales shop, and the job was for a junior system admin / tech support / PC builder. When we asked if he had any questions, the only thing he wanted to know was if he could surf pronoun in the office after hours. Fact from past times I've told this story. Our manager said yes, as long as he used an office without a window and the front door was locked. We hired him. We later fired him. Not pronoun related. I was the one being interviewed in this scenario. To this day, I honestly couldn't tell you what happened, but for some reason I answered every single question he asked me with I don't know. Why did my brain freeze up like this? I really don't know. When I was working at a warehouse as a manager, someone came into an interview I was performing falling down drunk. Literally couldn't string more than a few words together without slurring. Reeked of alcohol, the works. He was applying to be a truck driver. Needless to say, I didn't hire him. I never scheduled an interview for this candidate, but I had a man come into/call the store multiple times over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. He was asking about a job for his wife. He said she was available to specific days of the week, for a specific 4-hour time span each day. Not really the availability we're looking for. I told him multiple times, as nicely as possible, that we do not hire candidates with such limited availability, and that I would be happy to discuss his wife's application with her if she contacted me. When he would come into the store, his wife would be with him, but never said anything. He eventually mentioned that she doesn't speak English at all. I had to tell him that I can't hire someone who can't communicate with any of our employees or customers. I have to say, the girl who admitted to leaving Paneras because it was too fast-paced did not think it through when she applied to my Starbucks store. I was the interviewee. I was applying for a city government job that I wasn't fully qualified for. I knew this, but I knew the head of the department, so that got me the in. I also took the initiative to pre-take several qualifying exams etc. and get myself certified in some areas of the job. So, with my bit of nepotism and initiative I managed to make it to the final round of interviews. It was down to 2 people. I expected another get-to-know-you interview type interview that I always do well with because I'm fairly personable and put off a trusting vibe. Well, this interview wasn't like that. First surprise was seeing the number of people waiting to interview me. The mayor, fire chief, police chief, and heads of all the other major departments were there. Next surprise came when they started taking turns asking very technical questions involving many different areas of expertise. I could only answer about 1 out of every 10 questions. The interview lasted for 2 hours. I still wish after 10 minutes I had just politely acknowledged what we all knew. That I was unqualified and apologize for wasting their time. At least then I could have saved some face. I still get embarrassed thinking about this today. Well over a decade later,